The room was too quiet for how many people were inside. I counted 8-9 if you included the paralegal by the door pretending not to listen. The chairs were polished leather, the table a slab of mahogany that seemed to drain the warmth out of the air. I sat at the far end, coat still damp from the morning rain, my hands folded in my lap. No one looked at me. At the head of the table sat Helena Nathaniel's widow hair, knotted back neatly ivory blouse, crisp earrings, no more than 2 modest studs. On either side of her men in suits shuffled papers and clicked pens, their eyes never rising above the lines in front of them. Mr. Dorian Haynes, the lawyer, cleared his throat. His voice was soft, practiced, the kind that had read 100 wills. We are here to review the final estate arrangements of the late Nathaniel Ward, he said, explaining that the session would be formal and recorded per Nathaniel's request. Helena leaned forward, her fingers pressed together like she was conducting the room. With perfect poise, she confirmed that all trust documents had been finalized before his passing. She listed assets in a Steady Voice Foundation Holdings investment accounts, property deeds, intellectual property, all placed under her management. I listened, waiting for my name, waiting for the acknowledgement that the man I had built so much with would leave me something to carry forward, some recognition of the life we had shared. Instead, Helena's words landed like ice. No distributions are allocated to Mrs. Leora Ward under the current will. No explanation, no apology, just erasure delivered like a line item on a spreadsheet. My chest hollowed, but I kept my eyes on the smooth wood of the table. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Haynes glanced toward me and offered the smallest of smiles, a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe knowledge. He even gave a short, quiet laugh, as if he'd seen this moment coming in a way the rest hadn't. When the meeting ended, I walked home through rain that seemed sharper than before. The house was colder than it should have been. White lilies from the funeral still filled the air. Their sweetness turned harsh, lingering in a way that felt staged. Boxes already lined the hallway, neatly labeled in Helena's precise hand. Office to storage bedroom photos, study. Nathaniel's books were gone, the framed diploma from his teaching days, missing even the armchair where he used to sit by the window, stripped of its cushion. On the dining table lay a single envelope, my name printed in block letters. Inside was a list Helena had drawn up, items deemed appropriate for me to keep. A scarf, a photo album, a ceramic coffee mug with a fading quote. That was all. The kitchen gleamed like a showroom, no magnets, no calendar scribbled with pencil reminders, no warmth. It was as if my presence had been scoured from the walls. I thought back to the funeral. Helena at the podium in heels, clicking against marble. Her words precise. The slideshow exactly 17 minutes long, every detail arranged with mechanical care. She hadn't faltered once. And afterward, as we left, no one asked if I needed a ride home. Not a cousin, not an old friend. Without Nathaniel at my side, I was already invisible. The emptiness pushed me into the study. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, only that there had to be something Helena had overlooked. At first, the drawers seemed bare, a few receipts, a dried pen, scraps of notepads. But the lower left drawer stuck as it always had. Nathaniel used to joke the house was keeping secrets. I tugged harder and felt something catch beneath the lining. A thin manila folder emerged, brittle with age. Inside were only 3 pages. The first was handwritten in Nathaniel's shaky script. Helena wants me to update the will. Says it's for clarity. Too careful. Haven't told Leora. She'd see through it. The second was a partial draft of the will, my name written clearly beside provisions, before being crossed out in red ink with a note in the margin. Discuss with H. The last page listed appointments I never knew about scheduled on days when he had told me he was too tired to see anyone. My throat tightened. He had been afraid enough to hide these pages. I pressed my hand flat against his, writing the lines trembling under my touch. And I knew this wasn't the end of the story Helena wanted told. That night, I dialed the one number I hadn't used in years. Julian answered on the second ring, his voice steady, unchanged. He had once been closer to Nathaniel than to me, a confidant in matters I wasn't always privy to, but I trusted him. I found something I said simply, and we agreed to meet. The next morning, in a dim booth at a coffee shop tucked behind the old library, I slid the folder across to him. He read in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. When he reached the redacted will draft, his jaw clenched. "I knew something was wrong," he muttered finally. The last time he spoke to me, he asked, "What happens if someone rewrites your intentions for you?" Julian took the papers, promising to make quiet calls. He knew people in the bank where Nathaniel's trusts were handled, and someone who had once worked in estate law. By the end of the week, he had answers that unsettled everything. The transfer of control had been processed 6 months before Nathaniel died, while he was mid-cycle in chemotherapy, barely able to hold a pen. On paper, it said he was present, coherent. But I knew better. I had fed him broth through a straw that very week. Julian's voice on the phone was firm, certain. "This isn't just oversight. This was orchestrated, and I think I know who can prove it." Julian moved quickly, his quiet determination pressing against every conversation he pursued. A friend at the bank confirmed that key documents had been signed during a week when Nathaniel was too weak to hold a pen. Hospital logs showed he had been admitted for extended treatment, heavily sedated, barely strong enough to whisper. Yet somehow his signature appeared in pristine ink on the very same days. Julian didn't stop there. He reached out to an old contact who had once worked at the same law firm where Helena's associates had drafted the updated will. The man hesitated at first, then admitted he had left abruptly after disagreements over ethical practices. He wouldn't put anything in writing, but his silence and the way his eyes dropped when Nathaniel's name came up told us enough. Still, silence wasn't proof. Proof would have to come from someone who had been in the room. Julian found her first. Willa Chin had once been a junior assistant at Helena's firm, now working at a medical office across the river. She was wary of involvement, reluctant even to meet. But when Julian mentioned Nathaniel's name, there was a pause long enough to signal a memory she couldn't ignore. We arranged to meet her in a quiet diner off the highway, the kind where voices could blur into the hum of coffee pots and clattering dishes. She arrived with tired eyes, a notepad tucked under her arm, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. She wasted no time in warning us she had a daughter, a mortgage, and no desire to be dragged into trouble. I promised her we weren't there to destroy careers or raise headlines. We just wanted to understand what had happened in those final months. She flipped to a page in her notebook, the edges worn thin from being opened too often. "Last fall," she said quietly, on a Sunday evening, I returned to the office to drop off files. Helena was there with another associate. She asked me to witness a signature on trust documents, but Nathaniel wasn't there. She told me he had just stepped out, that it was urgent. I asked once if we should wait, and she said no. He had approved it already. She insisted. Willa pushed the notebook across the table, and in faded ink I saw her handwriting, 4:45 p.m. Sunday. No N present. H insisted. Her voice faltered. I wrote it down because something felt wrong. I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. When Julian asked if she still had any copies, she hesitated, then admitted she had kept one PDF from her time at the firm, a backup she had never opened. "I didn't think it would matter," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would ever ask." Her words were the crack in the armor we had been waiting for. Proof existed. Maybe enough to bring truth into daylight. Days later, an invitation arrived by courier. Heavy cardstock tucked in a navy envelope embossed with the new seal of the foundation. My name was printed correctly, at least. It was for a tribute evening where Helena would stand on stage in Nathaniel's place as managing executive, the program neatly listing her name beside his under the tagline, continuing his vision. I went not because I wanted to be seen, but because I needed to place something in the right hands. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air full of practiced laughter and polite toasts. Familiar faces passed me without pause. Donors who had once hugged me at holidays, now treating me like a stranger without Nathaniel beside me. Helena stood near the stage, radiant in black satin, smiling as if the world belonged to her now. She noticed me just before the program began, her smile flickering for half a heartbeat before settling back into composure. I didn't approach her. Instead, I slid into a seat beside Lawrence Blaine, one of Nathaniel's oldest mentors and a founding board member. I greeted him softly and slipped him a sealed envelope. For the board's eyes only, I said nothing more. He didn't open it then, but he slipped it into his pocket with a nod that told me he understood. The program played out in measured steps, soft piano underscoring images of Nathaniel's life. Helena at the podium with a flawless speech promising strength, transparency, and vision. The applause was polite, but as I glanced sideways, I noticed Lawrence wasn't clapping. His hand rested near the pocket where the envelope lay heavy with truth. I left before dessert, confident the letter would speak for itself. 3 days later, Julian called early, his tone sharpened with urgency. "They've postponed the vote," he said. "The board isn't moving forward with Helena's appointment. Not yet." He didn't need to explain why. The questions were already being asked, but with questions came consequences. By afternoon, I received a formal letter from Helena's legal team, 4 pages accusing me of defamation and interference threatening damages if I continued to spread what they called misinterpreted documents. I read it 3 times, then set it aside. It was a threat wrapped in professionalism, but it meant something else too. It meant they were worried. Julian and I met with Lydia Hart, a probate litigator he trusted. She studied Willa's note, the partial will with Nathaniel's redactions and the hospital records Julian had uncovered. When exactly was the signature processed, she asked. Julian opened his laptop, showing the metadata. The timestamp was 9:12 p.m. on a Sunday night, the exact time hospital logs confirmed Nathaniel was under palliative sedation, barely conscious. Lydia leaned back, her expression calm but resolute. "That isn't oversight," she said. "That's fraud." 2 days after Lydia's conclusion, another voice stepped forward. A former junior associate from Helena's firm reached out through Julian offering a sworn statement. He had left the practice abruptly months earlier, uneasy with what he described as internal pressures to expedite sensitive revisions. His statement claimed Helena had instructed staff to minimize paper trails to keep key discussions verbal and to ensure all sign-offs appeared seamless regardless of circumstances. When he raised concerns about whether clients were present or aware, he was silenced. Reading his account, my stomach knotted with both fury and relief at the extent of manipulation relief that truth was beginning to surface in more than whispers. That week, the Foundation's board released a public statement. Helena, it announced, would not be accepting the role of executive director in the interest of preserving Nathaniel's legacy and minimizing division. The language was polished, diplomatic, but beneath it was collapse. Helena had been forced to bow out, not with confession, but with a carefully staged retreat. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of deceit, only a graceful mask over the wreckage. Yet her absence from the podium was victory enough for now. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt hollow. Truth uncovered still carried the sting of loss. I returned to the mansion, now echoing with silence, and opened the desk Nathaniel had used for years. I had searched it before, but this time my hand found a leather-bound journal wedged behind files. Inside was an earlier draft of the will, not a copy, but his handwriting in ink, precise and unshaken. My name appeared clearly alongside instructions for co-stewardship of the foundation housing provisions and a personal note written in the margin. She built this with me. Protect her always. Tears blurred the page as I traced the ink. This was Nathaniel's truth, the one no manipulation could erase. It was not notarized, not formal, but it was conviction carved in his own hand. For the first time since his passing, I felt seen again. Lydia presented me with options. "We can sue," she said with quiet certainty. "You have enough for damages, for fraud, perhaps even criminal charges. The board would likely settle. You could secure compensation, a public apology." I shook my head before she finished. Money was never the aim. Apologies wrung from legal pressure carried no weight. "I want the record corrected," I told her. "I want the truth to outlast all of this." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. A week later, Julian and I walked into the courthouse together, carrying a folder, heavy with documentation, the early will. Willa's notepad, digital logs of fraudulent signatures, the sworn statement from the junior associate, and Nathaniel's handwritten line. She built this with me. Protect her always. We didn't file a lawsuit. Instead, we filed a historical correction, a motion to preserve the true record in public archives. By noon, the documents were logged into county records, permanent and untouchable. Outside, the spring air carried a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Julian glanced at me as we walked toward the car. "I thought this would end in a courtroom," he admitted. "No," I said softly. "This ends where it began with Nathaniel and with the truth." That evening, an email arrived from the board chair. No flowery introduction, no grand declarations. Just 2 lines. "Your name has been restored to the original charter. Co-founder, lifetime advisor. We've updated the archive effective immediately." I closed the laptop and let the words settle into me like a steady pulse. My name was not erased. It was written back where it always belonged. In the weeks that followed, I moved quietly through the foundation spaces, no longer invisible, but no longer needing recognition either. At the community garden Nathaniel and I had once built, I found new volunteers, planting seed trays, laughing softly as they worked. They didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell them. I only walked toward the oak tree we had planted years ago after the first grant came through. Its branches stretched wide now, roots deep, casting shade over a simple plaque embedded in stone. In memory of those never thanked out loud. I traced the letters with my fingers, knowing what they meant. The garden hummed with life children's voices in the distance, the squeak of wheelbarrows, the rustle of leaves. Nathaniel's legacy lived here not in ledgers or portfolios, but in earth and hands and laughter. I sat on the bench beneath the tree and let the breeze move through me. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was steadiness. The truth had outlasted the noise. My name was no longer absent from the story we built together. It had been restored not as a favor, not as a footnote, but as fact. And that is what remains when all else fades. Not wealth, not power, but the simple endurance of truth. If this story moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below to support the channel and hear more stories like this.